Just a few weeks into Major League Baseball's offseason, we've gotten a massive update on an investigation into a betting scandal involving two pitchers for the Cleveland Guardians, Emmanuel Clase and Luis Ortiz, after last hearing that the pair had been placed on leave on July of this year. On November 9th, the news broke that the pair have now been indicted and face multiple federal charges for their roles in a massive gambling scheme that has been spanning for years now. Both players have been accused of intentionally throwing pitches for balls in order to win big money for the bettors that the pair were working with, which is estimated to have totaled $450,000, and has the players facing up to 65 years in prison. Until this point, we've mostly speculated on the evidence that investigators have found detailing the involvement of Clase and Ortiz, but today we're going to be walking through the details of the indictment, including text messages, money transfers, and the numerous examples of the scheme at work that has now spanned 3 seasons. Let's get to the truth and the details behind Major League Baseball's massive betting scandal. On July 3rd of 2025, news broke that Guardians pitcher Luis Ortiz had been placed on non-disciplinary paid leave that would last through the end of the All-Star break. All that was known at the time was that there was an ongoing MLB investigation related to gambling, and that the league was investigating Ortiz for a pair of suspicious pitches in a June 15th game and a June 27th game that both drew unusual betting activity. The pitches were flagged by a betting integrity firm and referred to sportsbook operators, according to The Athletic. On July 18th, just 2 weeks after the news initially broke, Ortiz's leave was extended through August 31st. 10 days later, another bomb was dropped when it came out that teammate Emmanuel Clase had also been placed on leave as part of the investigation. As the August 31st deadline arrived, it broke that both players were to remain on leave until further notice, effectively ending the season for both players. The news of the suspensions and investigation came just a year after MLB had disciplined 5 players for betting on baseball, including a lifetime ban for Tucupita Marcano for betting on games that involved his team, the Pittsburgh Pirates, though he did not play in any of the games that he bet on. The other 4 players received a 1-year suspension because their gambling activity on Major League games did not involve the teams that they were currently a part of. Also occurring last year was the investigation into Shohei Ohtani and his interpreter, Ippei Mizuhara, who pled guilty in June of 2024 to bank and tax fraud after he admitted to using Ohtani's money to bet on sports other than baseball to pay his existing gambling debts. Ohtani was not found guilty of any wrongdoing, and Mizuhara is currently in federal prison serving his 57-month sentence. But none of these recent Major League Baseball gambling scandals would come close to what was to be revealed in the coming months. On November 5th of 2025, an indictment was filed by the Eastern District of New York against Emmanuel Clase and Luis Ortiz on charges related to wire fraud, money laundering, and bribery, with each player facing a maximum of 65 years in prison. The indictment was unsealed on Sunday, November 9th, and Ortiz was arrested the same day at Boston's International Airport. He appeared in court 1 day later and was granted release and posted a $500,000 bail. Ortiz's lawyers maintain his innocence and called the government's case weak and circumstantial, but I'll let you determine that. On November 13th, Clase was arrested at John F. Kennedy Airport after he returned from the Dominican Republic, was arraigned the same day, and also maintains his innocence. The indictment outlines in great detail examples of fraudulent pitches, text messages, phone calls, bank transfers, and meetings between Clase, Ortiz, and at least 2 bettors who placed the fraudulent bets across 2 different sportsbooks. These bettors are referred to as Better 1 and Better 2 in the indictment, though their identities are known, but I'll just be referring to them as Better 1 or Better 2. It is alleged that these 2 bettors were associated with other individuals who had accounts on these sportsbook platforms, and used their accounts to place more bets on pitches thrown by Clase and Ortiz. Knowing all this, let's step through the indictment section by section. Clase's involvement is outlined first in great detail, and the indictment states that starting around May of 2023, Clase got together with the 2 identified bettors and others to throw specific pitches in games so that all parties could profit. They agreed that Clase would throw balls instead of strikes so that bettors could place bets on the pitch being called a ball, and slower pitches, usually sliders, so that bettors could bet the under on pitch velocity. The first documented case when the Guardians were playing the Mets. The exact pitch isn't documented in the indictment, but Clase only appeared in 1 game against the Mets, and bettors were able to win around $27,000 by wagering that Clase would throw a pitch faster than 94.95 miles per hour. The next case was on June 3rd, just a few weeks later, and the exact pitch that bettors won $38,000 from was well documented in a game against the Twins. 4 days later, on June 7th, the bettors won $58,000 by placing multiple bets that Clase would throw a ball and that the pitch would be under 94.95 miles per hour. The next section of the indictment is where things get even crazier. On April 13th, 2025, after bettors won $15,000 from a pitch that Clase threw the previous night, Clase texted one of the bettors asking if he had been able to wager anything. The bettor's response said that he had bet and won money, and Clase directed them to send some of it to the DR. Clase provided the bettor with contact information for the recipient and told them to send it as if it were someone else, adding that the money was for repairs at the country house. Just over a month later, on May 17th, Clase texted the same bettor asking if they were ready, to which he got the response, "but of course." This text happened at 8:24 p.m., several hours after the game that day had started. About 10 minutes after the texts were sent, the bettors won around $10,000 on pitches that were thrown by Clase after he had entered the game. A few days later, Clase reached back out with bank account information and said, "Let me know when you send the thing," to which the bettor responded with, "I will start with $2,000. But the texts during games weren't even the craziest interactions these two had. On April 25th, the same bettor traveled to Ohio and visited Clase at his home, and being the good host that he was, he purchased tickets for the bettor to attend the Guardians game the following day. At 3:16 p.m., in the middle of the game that started at 1:10 p.m., Clase sent a text to the bettor, and a few seconds later they shared a phone call that lasted around 2 minutes. 4 minutes later, several bettors won $11,000 on a pitch thrown by Clase. After the game, the two got together at Clase's home. The same occurrence would happen on May 11th when the two met and went to Cleveland's game the same day. After receiving information from Clase, several bettors won $11,000, and the bettor visited Clase at his home once again after the game. If the home visits weren't enough, Clase provided money on some occasions to the bettor so that he could use the money to wager on the pitches. The conversation had over text told Clase to send the money, in this case $2,500, to another individual electronically, who then sent it to bettor 1. On that same day, the bettors won $3,500 by placing bets on Clase's pitches, and Clase again met with the bettor at his home after the game. But these small returns weren't enough, so the bettors started placing parlay bets on the platforms, in which one leg of the bets were fraudulent pitches thrown by Clase. Between 2023 and 2025, one of the bettors placed around 16 parlay bets that contained fraudulent pitches thrown by Clase. On May 28th at 1 p.m., one bettor sent Clase a text asking if he was all set, to which Clase responded yes. At 3:36 p.m. during the game, two bettors placed wagers totaling around $4,000 that a pitch by Clase would be a ball. Clase threw a pitch that would have been called a ball, but the batter swung and the bettors lost. 20 minutes after losing, bettor 1, that Clase would commonly text with, sent a gif of a man hanging himself with toilet paper, and even though the Guardians won the game, Clase responded with a gif of a sad dog face. It's estimated that between 2023 and 2025, the bettors won at least $400,000 from the two betting platforms on pitches thrown just by Clase. Once June of 2025 rolled around, Luis Ortiz allegedly got involved in the scheme. Clase allegedly coordinated deals between Ortiz and one of the bettors, who in turn coordinated with other bettors. For coordinating the deals, Clase requested and received payment. The first documented case for Ortiz was on June 15th, a game where Ortiz was the scheduled starting pitcher. Before the game, Ortiz and Clase agreed that in exchange for $5,000, Ortiz would throw a ball for his first pitch in the second inning. Clase agreed with one of the bettors that he would also receive around $5,000 for facilitating the deal. At about 1:40 p.m., about 2.5 hours before the game, the bettor sent a text to Clase asking, "How are we doing?" and "Everything under control there?" Then shortly after, the two had a phone call. Roughly 2 hours later at 3:30 p.m., with the game scheduled to start at 4:10 p.m., both bettors placed wagers totaling $14,000 that Ortiz's pitch would be a ball, and of course it was, which led to a payout of $26,000 for both bettors and $5,000 each for Clase and Ortiz. One day later, one of the bettors corresponded with one of Clase's associates, whose identity is also known, but in the indictment he is just known as an associate of Clase's in the Dominican Republic. The discussion between the associate and the bettor included directions to transfer small increments of $10,000 to multiple people in the DR. Shortly after this conversation, Clase sent a text to the bettor saying, "You said you were going to do it today, but you didn't tell me anything," in reference to the transfer of $10,000 for Ortiz and himself. The bettor said everything is there already, and later that day, Ortiz sent a message to Clase asking him to tell me what the guy from the thing told you, to which Clase responded, "They receive it tomorrow and I'll place it over there." Based on the information in the indictment, it seems like the intent was to have the bettor send the $10,000 in bribe payments to multiple people in the DR, then subsequently transfer these funds to Clase and Ortiz, or money laundering. A few days later, Ortiz sent a text to Clase that contained a photograph of an ID card for someone Ortiz is associated with in the DR and said, "Clase, tell them to put the 90,000 pesos there and to keep the other ones. Keep the 200 and the 90 to that person, please." The next day, Clase sent Ortiz back a photograph of a receipt for a wire transfer of 90,000 pesos from one of Clase's associates to Ortiz's associate, as well as an audio message directing Ortiz to tell his associates in the DR to lie about the purpose of the funds Ortiz was receiving. They're going to ask him what it is that payment for over there. Tell him that this is payment for a horse. Payment for a horse. You got that? Ortiz responded and said, "Okay, perfect." Roughly a week later on June 27th, Ortiz and Clase agreed that for $7,000, Ortiz would throw a ball for the first pitch of the third inning. Clase also arranged with one of the bettors that Clase would also get $7,000 for arranging the pitch, and he obtained tickets to the game for the bettor to attend. But before the game, bank security camera footage captured Clase withdrawing $50,000 in cash. Clase allegedly gave $15,000 of the cash he withdrew to the bettor to wager on Ortiz's upcoming pitch later that day. Roughly an hour later, security footage captured the bettor depositing $15,000 at the same bank that Clase withdrew the $50,000. The bettor and others wagered around $18,000 on the upcoming pitch, and after it was thrown, they received a payout of $37,000. It's estimated that in June 2025 alone, the bettors won at least $60,000 on pitches thrown by Ortiz. That's where the indictment evidence concludes, and the next section details the 4 counts that the pair are being charged with. The first 2 counts are wire fraud conspiracy and honest services wire fraud conspiracy, which really only differ in that the first count focuses on the scheme to defraud the betting platforms and covers May 2023 to June 2025, while the second count focuses on the fraud of the Cleveland Guardians and Major League Baseball of Clase and Ortiz's honest services and covers April 2025 to June 2025. Count 3 is conspiracy to influence sporting contests by bribery, which is targeting more of the integrity of the sport rather than general fraud like the first 2 counts, and has its own federal law dedicated to it. The final count is money laundering conspiracy, which to me is more straightforward than the others in that the 2 reportedly engaged in transactions that involved unlawful activities, and that the transactions were designed to conceal or disguise the unlawful activities. The next section details the assets that the government can seize should Clase and Ortiz be convicted. For counts 1, 2, and 3, which are all related to fraud and bribery, the government will seek to take back all money and assets that were made or received from the scheme. For count 4, the government will seize not just profits, but tools used like bank accounts or any property that can be traced back to these tools. This section also says that in the event that the assets involved in the scheme cannot be seized, then the government can take unrelated assets from Clase and Ortiz, such as houses, cars, or any other legitimate money the 2 have made, which is a great segue into the next thing I want to talk about: the relatively small amounts of money that these 2 were willing to throw away their careers for. Emmanuel Clase has earned over $15 million in his career, and he signed a 5-year, $20 million contract with the Cleveland Guardians in April of 2022, which could have kept him under contract through 2028 due to the 2 years of club control options at the end of the extension, which basically means Cleveland can decide to keep him for 2027 and 2028 if they wanted to, or they could let him go to free agency. His salary in 2025 was $4.9 million, and he was set to make $6.4 million in 2026, and he could have made $10 million in 2027 and 2028 had he performed well and had his club options picked up, either by Cleveland or another team, because his name was consistently in trade talks after he established himself as one of the best closers in baseball. So not only did he flush over $25 million of his current contract, but he also cost himself what could have been a $100 million deal had he hit free agency, with the likes of those signed by Josh Hader and Edwin Diaz for comparison. I'm sure the indictment doesn't include all of the money that Clase made in this scheme, but the small payments of $5,000 to $10,000 doesn't make sense to me, and I'm thinking that either we'll get more details on his motivation or he's just incredibly dumb. Ortiz, on the other hand, has made just over $2 million in his career and made roughly $800,000 this season. He is certainly not struggling financially, but compared to Clase's career pedigree and earnings, it's at least a little more digestible that Ortiz could have maybe viewed this scheme as easy money that would have an impact on him. Both players have been arrested, arraigned, and maintain their innocence at this point. In short, don't think you can ever get away with trying to rig a bajillion-dollar business that is the sports betting industry, especially in an age where every single pitch is already tracked by MLB teams looking to gain competitive edges on the ways pitches move and look to batters. On November 11th, MLB announced that they will now cap bets on individual pitches at $200 and that they will not be allowed to be part of parlay bets. This restriction would have almost certainly prevented the scandal that the sport is part of now, following the aftermath of the NBA gambling operation involving more than 30 people, including a head coach in Chauncey Billups and a current high-profile player in Terry Rozier, who was also making an insane amount of money. The basketball scheme involved rigged poker games backed by mafia families, and at this point I think that there may be more to this MLB operation than we know, even if it isn't to the level of mafia involvement. Nevertheless, it will certainly be a pivotal time for the sports betting industry and the sport as a whole. Thank you all for watching. Let me know what you think of all this madness, and let's hope that free agency news takes over our timelines moving forward instead of this garbage.